Hello, we're here today with Kuir Garang from South Sudan, who is an author, poet, and publisher living in Calgary and a great reflector on South Sudanese politics and life.
So my name is Kuir Garang, and I was born in South Sudan in 1980, and I lived in Sudan most of my life. But then, as many people know, Sudan was embroiled in civil war from 1955, when a year before independence, and then the war was ended in 1972, and then started again in 1983 until 2005. So that actually has a very big impact on how I lived. I had to seek refuge in Ethiopia with my family because of the war, the second civil war. So I went to Ethiopia. That's where I started my schooling. And then when the Ethiopian government was overthrown because it was communist based, it was a communist government. During the fall of the communist government in Russia, so Ethiopia also fell.
Can you tell me about the year?
It was 1991.
1991.
So in 1991, we had to move back to Sudan, and in Sudan, it was still in a state of war, so we had to move from refugee camp to refugee camp.
Okay, what was that like?
It was difficult because it's a state of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot, for example, even if the administrators want to establish a school, they can establish it. Then maybe in 3 months people move because the people get attacked, or there's no food there. People have to move in search of food. So if agencies, and international aid agencies cannot come to us, then we have to move somewhere closer to them. So I had to. In 1995, I told my father I wanted to go to school. There were no schools there, and people kept on moving.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to tell me, "Oh, the war will end." And I said, "We don't know when the war will end." He was someone who was, positive, has this positive attitude. So I moved to Kakuma, northern Uganda, northern Kenya in 1995. So I lived there until 2002 when I came to Canada through a special program.
What's it like living in the middle of a war?
There's something many people need to understand. When you live in that situation, that becomes your life. That is your world. You have to get used to it. So when someone, for example, in Canada, looks at that situation, they see it with a sense of horror. They think it's something horrible. But the person living it doesn't see it that way. You have to get used to it. It's bad, but you have to be mentally used to it. That's your life. That's where you're born. That's what you're used to. It's different. For example, I'm in Canada. If I go back now, my perception of the situation will be different because I will have a different angle. But once you live in that situation, you have to adapt. It becomes your life.
Could you describe a typical day?
A typical day, for example, when we're in Ethiopia, it was okay. The SPLM, Sudan People Liberation Movement, which was fighting the government, had communist ideas, and the government in Ethiopia was actually communist based. So they actually supported the SPLM. So when we lived in Ethiopia, we're not like refugees. We're free to move around. So when we're in Ethiopia until 91, I didn't even know what it means to be a refugee because it was just like our home because they received us like the citizens. But when I was in Kakuma, that's when I realized you cannot move out of the camp. You have to wait. The food comes from the NGOs, and every 2 weeks you have to wait for the food, and it doesn't last for 2 weeks. So we used to go to school, and I sometimes when I look at it, I'm amazed how we did it. We used to go to school. We didn't have breakfast. We don't even know we would have lunch, but we still have that. We had that heart to go to school. So a typical day would you just get up, you don't have any breakfast. You might be lucky sometimes you don't have breakfast. You don't even know you would have lunch, but we still went to school. The main problem in the camp was that sense of uncertainty. You don't know how long you would be there. I was in Calgary for 7 years, but there are the people now who are still there. They were born there, but they're still in Calgary now. They don't know where they would go next.
Okay. And can you describe your life? So you went to high school, right, in Kenya?
Yes, I went to high school in Kenya. I went to Kakuma, which is a refugee camp. It's still there. It's still there now.
Okay.
In 1995. And I studied in class 7. One main thing, when I left Ethiopia, I had finished grade 4. I didn't do 5. So when we were in Sudan, we had to move from place to place. So studying in grade 5 and 6 was problematic. So I didn't actually study. So I studied by myself. So when I went to Kakuma, I went to grade 7, while I didn't do 5 and 6. But I actually did well. I went to grade 7, and then in Kenya, from 1 to 8 is called primary school. But then you go to high school, which is from 9 to 12. So in 1995, I went to Kakuma, went to class 7, and then 1996, I sat for the exam they call Kenya Certificate of Primary Education, KCPE, and I was lucky. There was an NGO called JRS. It sponsored students who have done well out of the camp to a Kenyan school who were relatively better than the schools in the camp.
Okay. Was your family there with you?
No.
You were by yourself?
I left them in 1995 because my father, he was, he had that positivity saying, oh, the war will end. Okay. And I said, well, I will not wait for the war to end for me to go to school. I have to go to school. So I left them in 1995, went by myself to Kakuma.
How old were you?
I think I was 15.
You were 15 and traveling all by yourself?
There was one of my uncles who took us to Kakuma.
Okay.
And then left us there. We had to fend for ourselves.
He left you?
He left us there. Yeah.
Okay, so then what was it like? What did you do?
It was difficult, but I didn't know anyone. There were some relatives, but I didn't know them.
Okay.
So I had to talk to people. There were some people I knew, but I did not. You have to live with someone you understand well. So it was actually very difficult for me, but I had that heart. I wanted to go to school. Some of friends who came with me to Kakuma left because they couldn't take it.
But you were 15, you didn't know anybody. I mean, how did you find a place to live and how did you take care of yourself?
What he did, he took us to, because in the camp there were groups. So he took us to groups and they were ethnically based. So he took us to a group, but in that group in Kakuma, you cannot get any food if you don't have a registration card. We didn't have any registration cards. We tried to get it, but we couldn't. So I remember I was in a house he left us in, and then an old man told us, because one of my cousins who went with me to Kakuma he had an uncle. So I lived in the house for about 4 months. Then he came to me and told me, look, to live in Calgary, you have to have a registration number for food, but you don't. I cannot support the two of you. You have to look for a place to go. And I didn't know anyone, so I had to go around. And I was lucky to find a family. They are distant uncles. So I talked to them. At first they were hesitant because it's the same situation. It's another mouth to feed, but they don't have anything to give. But when they saw my situation, they were receptive. And I was able to, I think after a year, I was able to get a car. Okay. In Calgary. And looking at that, someone would say it would have affected my studies, or I would have gone back to my family, because my family in Sudan. Because the situation in the camp was worse than in Sudan. Because I have a family, we can suffer together. But I didn't go back because I put the school first.
Okay, so you were determined to go to school. And the other ones, you said that there were other children that came with you. Yeah. And then they ended up leaving because they couldn't take it.
They couldn't take it because it wasn't easy.
Okay.
It was difficult, and also it depends on how, I don't know whether how you raise or how one perceives life. But I put education first. And that's why I think I remained in Calgary.
Okay, so you finished your high school in Kenya.
Yeah.
What happened after?
I finished high school after JRS, because JRS sponsors students. We have about 1,000 students sitting for the exams, but they only need about 50 students. So you had to be in the top 50. So when I was sponsored by JRS and went to Kenyan high school, there was another NGO. It's actually a Canadian NGO called World University Service of Canada. It's based in Ottawa. So what they do, they go to these refugee camps and they look for students who have done well in high school, but they don't have the means to go to university. So they interview them, and if they see they can do well in university, they look at their transcripts, they interview them, and then they give them English assessment, and then they talk to the Canadian embassy to give them residency. So that's how I came to Canada. So they interviewed us and then gave us the permanent residency. So what they do, they talk also to universities. So the transcripts are sent to universities. And universities they have programs where students contribute for the cost of the WUSC students. The students come under what they call refugee sponsorship program under WUSC. So a student is given 1 year scholarship. Everything is paid for the first year, but then the other years it's up to the student to either work or get loans.
Okay.
But the first year is paid.
Okay.
So that's how I came to Canada.
Okay. Can you? I had a question about the time you were in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just tell me a little bit about your life when you were studying high school? You're living with these people you don't really know very well. What was that like? Like, what were your study habits like? What was your life like? If you could give me like a specific, like let's say any memory that you have of that time that has stayed with you since.
Because Kenyan high school, we were in a boarding school.
Okay. So
especially when we left the camp and we went to high school, it's a boarding school.
Okay.
And it's very regimented.
Okay.
It's like a soldier's camp. So you get up in the morning, you have a bell. And when the bell rings...
What time did the bell ring?
I think it's about, say, 6 in the morning. Then you go to the dining hall to have your breakfast. And then after that, you go to class until you have your breaks. So everything is regimented. So you cannot... It's not like here, for example, where student, everything is relaxed, everything is informal. Everything there is formal. Teachers are like our gods. They're like our gods. So when we were in Kenyan schools, what helped us is the studies. Even if you don't want to study, you have to stay in class. So we have the classes, and after classes, you have the period where some people go to play sport, and then you go back to class, say at 7, and then you study until around 10. So there you have to study. Even if you don't like to study, you cannot go anywhere. You cannot go out of the school. Because if you have to go out of the school, you have to get a permission to go out.
Okay.
And you have the uniform. So if someone sees you outside, then that's a problem. And if I have a civilian clothes, it has to be in the... Sometimes they never allowed them. So when we leave the camp to come to school, you have to leave, they used to call them civilian clothes. So if the teacher finds it in your box, then they know you can use it to sneak out at night. So you only had uniform. So the only thing you can use to go out is the uniform. People will see you. A teacher sees you in town because the teachers can go out. Why are you here? Where's your permission slip?
Did that happen to anyone?
Yes, it happened.
Did it happen to you?
It happened to me once.
Okay.
Because I had a friend come from Nairobi. Because in 1995 to 1997, it was terrible for me. But in 1998...
Why was it terrible?
Because I had no support at all.
Okay.
It was only what I got in the camp. But...
And when you say support, can you be a bit more specific?
Support, for example, there's some people who had relatives maybe in Canada or in Australia, and they can send them some money.
Okay.
When that happens, life becomes relatively better in the camp.
Okay.
But in 1998, my dad worked for an NGO called Sudan Medical Care. He was an administrator. So he used to... So after 1998, things become better because I would go to Nairobi and get some money and come back to the camp.
Okay, and how did this money affect you? How did it make your life better?
It affected me because I could afford to buy things.
Okay, what things?
For example, I could afford to buy things like sugar, buy things like nutritious food, for example, fruits and vegetables.
Okay, were you not fed at the camp?
We were fat, but they were not nutritious. It was basic things like grains, sometimes oil.
Oil?
Yeah.
They would just feed you oil?
Oil and grains,
okay.
For example. You in North America, you call it corns, but we call it maize.
Okay,
you
maize.
call it maize, yeah. So things like that, but it wasn't nutritious. So when you have some money, then now you can afford to go to a Kenyan market and buy things that are nutritious.
Okay, and what was when you had to eat this maize and corn? How did it? I mean, what was going through your mind? Like, how did it affect you?
Well, if you had it, you were appreciative.
Okay.
Because it wasn't always available. Okay. So if you had it, it was the only thing you had. Unless, for example, when I had the money, then I know now I can afford some stuff. From that moment, I can know that what I was eating then wasn't that good. But at the moment, when I didn't have the money, that was the best I could get, and it wasn't always available. So once I had it, I had to appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, because there was no comparison then.
What's the longest you've ever been without food?
I think the longest would be 2 days.
2 days. So how do you study on 2 days without food?
I couldn't tell you that.
Okay.
But we did it. I don't, now looking back, I wonder how we did it.
Okay.
It's amazing how we did it, but we did it. It was difficult, yeah. Okay. So I left Montreal in 2007 after I graduated and moved to Calgary because I didn't pick up French. So you had to have to be bilingual to get a proper job. So I moved to Calgary, and I've always liked to write. Since I was in camp, I was writing poetry, and it was at first difficult to get published. So I kept on writing. I just liked the idea of writing. I was writing fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and I also writing political articles about South Sudan. So I started that about around 2003, and we published them online. So when I moved,
what else did you write about? Can you be more specific?
I write mostly political articles,
Okay.
which we publish online, and then non-fiction. And non-fiction are based on, philosophical ideas and also ideas based on culture. For example, as a refugee in Ethiopia and in Kenya and living in Canada, so I lived in different cultural settings. So that those always have informed my writings, besides philosophical writings. So that's how I write. So most of, if you look at the books I write, they have this racial undertone, how different races, different cultures interact. So and that informs my writing. So coming to Calgary, I continue to write.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized I can do things on my own, or I can even have an impact from what I write, talk to people. So I started writing, became real frequent for me, and it's easy. It's easy. For example, there was the book I just finished. I finished it in 2 weeks.
What's the title of this
The
book?
title is called South Sudan Ideologically.
Okay.
So that's the title. So now what I do, I write my books, and I do everything, even the layout. And the plan is, because in South Sudan we don't have any publishing house. So my main purpose is to take it to South Sudan, publish ideas kids can relate to. Now in South Sudan, they read books that were published in East Africa. And those books don't reflect anything about them. They read names that are foreign. So now I wanted them to read names that they can relate to. They see their names, and that encourages them. They can say in the future, I can do the same thing, rather than reading, stuff that were written by other people and they cannot relate to. That further alienates them. So that's what I do, and that's why I established the Nile Press, which I'm still trying to develop, and hopefully take to South Sudan. And I'm in communication with some booksellers in Juba.
Okay.
And they're much interested in supporting the same, and also support literacy in South Sudan. And that's what I'm doing now with my writing.
Okay. And you said you used to write political articles. Can you be more specific about these political articles? Like what exactly is happening and has happened in South Sudan that would encourage you to write these pieces?
Because the leadership now in South Sudan they were a rebel organization. So there were soldiers. There were soldiers who only listened to their superiors. So if you had to listen to someone, it had to be someone, superior to you, your commander. So now they are the governors. They are the leaders in the South. Mm-hmm. And they have to move from being military leaders to being political leaders who think like, the average civilian. So that becomes a problem to them because they are not used to it. So when they are told this is wrong, they wonder because no one else told them what to do except someone superior. So if a young man like me writes an article and tells them, you know what, this is wrong, they don't receive it well. So that encouraged us to write article to sort of say, okay, this is wrong.
What do you mean by what's wrong?
For example, in terms of development, in terms of human rights, in terms of strategies to develop the country. So the peace was signed in 2005. Mm-hmm. So South Sudan was given some autonomy, so self-government before independence. So, and they had their own budget, they had their own army. So what they could do is to develop the infrastructure. They were destroyed by war, if they existed at all. They had to build schools. They have to develop the healthcare system. They had to make sure that, because people live on tribal basis, that people who are employed in ministries are not from one tribe. Things are slowly changing, but in in the years following the CPA signing, Comprehensive Peace Agreement, if the minister was from one tribe, almost 80% of the people would be from the same tribe.
Okay.
So these are the things that we are criticizing.
And how does most of like an organization being from the same tribe affect people, affect the greater population?
It affects the population because people are incompetent get employed. Because he's my cousin, I'll just give him the job. So that means people incompetent are employed, and when incompetent people are employed, development is stalled.
Okay.
It's stalled, so it doesn't go ahead.
So like the jobs would go to
people
within their circle, even regardless of whether or not they're qualified. Yes. What else?
The other thing is money gets embezzled. So if we all are from the same tribe and the money is allocated to the ministry, we're not accountable to anyone. So we can do whatever we want to do with it. We can embezzle, we can lie, we can inflate numbers. We can say, oh, we had this project, for example, to build a road, and then instead of saying it was 30 million, we say it was 60 million.
Okay.
And the rest who are around me are from my own tribe, so they cannot rat me out. So we'll just do it. That means the money that would have gone to development is now going to the pocket of people.
Okay.
So that is one of the things that we're saying. The other thing is different ideas. If different people come and they sit together, that means we can think about things that can move the country forward.
When you say different people from different tribes?
From different tribes.
Okay.
If we are from the same tribe, we work, for example, Ministry of Transport, and we are in charge of allocating money for that ministry. And someone comes, for example, from a different tribe, asking money for roads in their area of the country. Will not be that receptive to them, as opposed to people coming from our own place. They are our people, so we'll be easy with them.
Okay.
And these are some of the things that we are telling them they're wrong.
And this is still happening?
It's still happening. It's still happening because it's not easy for them. One of the major problem, the leader who was a leader from 1983 to 2005 when he was killed in a helicopter crash, he was well educated. He was educated in the U.S., had his PhD in the States. He was a strategist. He would tell you, this is plan A, this is plan B, this is plan C. If A doesn't work, we go to the second one. So he was a strategist. The leader we have now, not well educated, not because he's not well educated, he's not a strategist.
Can you tell me the names of the two leaders?
The first one was Kuir Garang.
Mm-hmm.
Kuir Garang, that was the first leader. He died in 2005 in a helicopter crash.
And he's the one who got his PhD in the United States?
Yes, he was a strategist. The current leader now, his name is Kiir. He's the current leader. He's relatively politically okay because he's genuine. He's a diplomat, but he's not a strategist. Okay. So he listens to people who are not helping the country. So he listens to ideas that are not leading us anywhere.
Can you be more specific?
For example, he the first thing he did was, the leader who died in 2005 decided to say, he didn't like, tribalized politics. So he decided to put people as governors from different tribes. For example, I'm from a state called Jonglei. So instead of someone from Jonglei being the governor, he brought someone from a different state because he wanted to do away with this tribal politics.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a plan. I think about a 90 days plan, some years plan. So when the new leader came, he did away with everything.
So now he's back to tribal system?
Yes.
Okay.
And he doesn't have long-term plans,
okay,
which we can see as working.
Okay.
And now we've seen in the last few days, things became really, really bad because since 2005, nothing has happened. People became disillusioned, services are not being provided. Sometimes civil servants go for months without being paid. No one is accountable. No one is accountable for where's the money exactly. Why are people not being paid? In his own state, the president, people are dying of hunger. Why? And they drive, these fancy cars, these SUVs.
Who's they?
The ministers.
Okay.
The leaders, the president.
The lawmakers, the people in charge. Okay.
The cars are bought by the government.
Mm-hmm.
They are fueled by the government. And we say people are dying and you're buying cars for them. They get salaries. Why can't they buy their own cars? But we cannot say that because they say it, so they have it. So this is one of the problems with the new president. He's not now receptive to to being criticized. Journalists are being arrested, and dissenting voices are being sidelined. Now, when you had recently, he dissolved the cabinet, the whole cabinet, and the vice president. The vice president had gone public saying, we're leading nowhere. We have to change. So he didn't like it. First, I think the vice president didn't do it well because he went public and criticized the president in the foreign media. So that was bad. But all the things he was saying are okay. Services are not being provided. People who actually criticize the president or tell the president what to do are sidelined. So, and that is a big issue now we have in South Sudan. And there's much tension now with the vice president who was removed. The other thing is constitution is not being followed. So when something favors the president, then he does it based on the constitution. And sometimes, for example, how do you fire an elected governor, elected by the people? So there's a provision in the constitution that says the president can remove an elected governor if there's a crisis. So he has used that provision in the constitution to remove two governors. But there's no crisis. Even if there's a crisis, it has to be a crisis threatening national security. That's what the constitution says. But he goes ahead because he doesn't like them.
So it's personal reasons.
It's personal reasons. But what can we do? A few weeks ago, about a week ago, when we had the new vice president, because he has to choose the vice president, and then the parliament now can vet whether to accept or to reject. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks ago, we had the cabinet. So some people were vetted, and one minister was rejected. He was a legal advisor, and he put him as a minister of justice. The parliament rejected him. The president said fine. He accepted it. But when he appointed someone to be the vice president, his name is James Waniga, who was the Speaker of the National Assembly, he knew there's a potential for the parliament to reject him. So he called the caucus, the SPLM, his party, and intimidated them. If you don't accept him, I will dissolve the parliament. He intimidated them. So when they went to the parliament, they did not follow the due process. All they did is accept him as he said.
Okay.
And he is now the vice president without any vetting of the parliament.
Is there a large South Sudanese community here in Calgary?
It's large. We don't know the exact number, but okay. It's estimated between 15 and 20,000.
Okay.
And
do you do some campaigning from here in Calgary?
No, we don't. We don't do that. The only thing we did was with the referendum.
Okay.
When South separated, that's when people became really active politically.
Okay.
But in terms of what they're doing, we don't campaign for them, but there's some people who identify with some political parties.
Oh, no, it's like what I meant was like how do the people here from South Sudan respond to what's going on right now? Because you're living here in Canada, but you all still really care about what's going on in your home country. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about the community and how you respond to what's going on back home?
It's a little bit murky because when Sudan was still one, many South Sudanese used to, they would go to City Hall, waving the flag, saying, oh, this is happening, for example, with the Talisman. I don't know if you know the Canadian oil company used to work in South Sudan. Mm-hmm. And they were forced to leave because of the atrocities being committed by the government using the money they got from oil companies. So people were active. And anything that's happening, for example, the government of Sudan, killing people in Darfur or in the south, people are active.
Okay.
Now, South Sudan is independent. Mm-hmm. It's independent. But what is happening in the south is something that we don't like. It's just like Khartoum has been transferred to Juba because Juba is doing exactly what Khartoum was doing. But then the problem is, can people go on the streets to condemn the government? No one has done that yet. So we just talk, but we have not taken an active role to do what exactly we did with the Khartoum. We could go and say, oh, Bashir, the president of Sudan, is killing people. So we go to City Hall, we call the media, talk to the media. But with the South, they're confused. They don't know what to do. it was the government that we thought would actually give out the services we want. But now, it's doing exactly what Khartoum was doing, killing people, censoring journalists, sidelining dissenting voices. So people don't know what to do. They don't know what they need to go on the streets, to City Hall, to condemn the government that liberated them. So you can see the dilemma here. People are confused. But online, people are active. We are writing articles, and they have impact.
And when you say we are writing articles, it's you and...
so many South Sudanese.
Here in Calgary?
Here in Calgary,
okay.
And in US, in Europe,
okay.
or in Australia. People are writing all these things.
And you are a writer. You're a poet, you're a writer, and you are also a publisher. Can you tell me a little bit about your publishing company? The
publishing, I started to sort of, present ideas based on the perspective of South Sudanese. Mm-hmm. Because most of the time, if you go online or go to the library, you have so many books that have been written about South Sudan or even about tribes. For example, the Nuer tribe, if you take an anthropology, elementary anthropology course, you will see Nuer. They are well studied. But the perspective that is presented is not ours. So what I wanted is to present things using our own perspective. If I write, for example, and send my manuscript to a publisher, they would want it to fit a certain angle. They want to sell. They have some audience. And I said, okay, what I would do is to write in the way I want. And also solicit ideas from South Sudanese and see how they view things. I'll give you an example. In 1947, Juba Conference, there was a conference before independence of Sudan from Egypt, and the British administrators in the South said, these people are different. They have to go their own way. So they convened a conference. They were only chiefs, because South Sudanese were not educated then. They were only chiefs, tribal chiefs, and some clerks. So they were confused. They say we are different. We are not educated, so give us time before we become independent. But the British and the Northern Sudanese, they decided to hoodwink them into unity. So now when people write about that event, many scholars have written, and they say these chiefs were not educated, and that's why South Sudan was part of Sudan. So they were confused because they were not educated. And I said, no, it's not because they were not educated. It's the kind of people they were dealing with. If you look at the minutes of the conference, which are also available to read, they said exactly what was good for South Sudanese. Even if they were not educated in the Western context, they knew what was good for their people. And they said it at the conference, but they were ignored. So it's not that they were not educated, it's that they would not have been listened to even if they were educated. So that perspective you cannot find it. That's what we have to say now. If I read the book, I don't find it. And I say, why can I say it? Why can we say it that way?
Okay. Yeah. And so that's why you started this publishing company?
That is why, to actually present our perspective.
When did you start your publishing company?
I started it in 2012, in the beginning of 2012, and then I had it registered in August of 2012.
And registered here in Canada?
Here in Alberta.
Here in Alberta.
Yeah.
Okay. And how many books have you written so far?
I've written about 9, but I've published 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
And these 7 books you published with your publishing company?
I published 5 with mine, but 2 with a different publishing company.
Okay. Yeah. And these books are all about South Sudan?
No. I have 2 novels. Mm-hmm. The first one it's immigrant experiences, of an immigrant family and how they relate to life and how they get transformed as they live in Canada. So it's just immigrant experiences. The second novel is a political novel. It's mostly about the relationship between the West and Africa, and then political dynamic within Africa. How leaders, some leaders, they sometimes they collude with multinational companies that invest in Africa. So some self-interested political leaders, they misuse power. Mm-hmm. So and that's what I looked at, and then how the West relates to Africa in terms of economics, political issues. So that's a novel, the second novel. I call it The Pipers and the First Phase. The Pipers is a politically active group that they want to change the world in an unconventional way. They infiltrate governments, and what they do, they take inside information and condition governments and individuals to do things for poor people. And the other one is the other one is a non-fiction book on race, color, and racism. And then there's one children's book, and then two poetry books.
And are these books fairly well received in South Sudan?
Yes. The only difficult thing is access to books in South Sudan is difficult.
Okay.
But for those who have them, they do appreciate them because it sort of gives them some hope, because it gives them a sense of pride. Oh, this is something from my own place, and I can also do it. And I've seen many people now are trying to, oh, I can actually do it. I won't write a book. So it gives them a sense of pride, and that I can also do that if he can do that.
Okay.
And that means a lot to me.
Okay. And so do you see your books kind of acting as, you said they give people hope, but then what else do you see your books doing for the people?
For the people is how they think.
Okay.
It's also how they think, because, for example, myself, I don't affiliate with any political party. But South Sudanese now, they have to relate. You know, someone will say, "Oh, I'm from SPLM," or "I'm from this party." I don't do that. So when I have ideas, I don't associate them with any political party. So they might not be as objective as someone would want them to be, but at least they're not partisan. So when people look at things that way, it makes things easy. The second thing is tribal problems. So when I write, I can criticize my own tribe. I can criticize other tribes. But when I criticize, I have to acknowledge the good things they do, and then now let them know this is wrong. But that's not a culture we've developed in South. We don't have it. So sometimes someone can criticize someone because they're from a different tribe. But my tribe, I don't want to criticize it. That's what I want to change. Mm-hmm. So people, when they read my work, they can see that I criticize my own tribe. And one of the major things is some people, we have a cult of, this cult of personality where we see some people as completely, they cannot be criticized. So I see that's wrong. As long as you have a good case against that person, and what people have to remember all the time is say, for example, look at the president. I criticize all the president. People think I don't like him. I said, no, I don't. It's not that I don't like him. I don't like what he's doing. So there's a difference. As a person, there's no problem. So I can criticize him, but I can say, oh, he's a good person in this way, and this is one good thing he has done. But this is the problem, and that's one of the things in my books, and I hope my books would encourage in South Sudanese to think that way.
Okay. And what's your latest project?
The latest project is a book I call it South Sudan Ideologically. So it's mostly idea-based. So I look at ideas from, I think, at the beginning of 1940s to the present. So I looked at how South Sudan is related to the Sudanese Arab, how they related to the British, and how they related amongst themselves, and how the first civil war affected them, the second civil war, and now in Juba, what is happening in Juba. So it's not a comprehensive historical account, but it's an analysis of ideas, historical figures, the most important events in South Sudan. So that's what I looked at. And again, coming to the last question you asked, how we can change how we think, how we look at one another. Because if we don't change how we look at one another, for example, then things would become really, really difficult for us. If I don't see an individual as an individual, whether they're from Nuer, from Shilluk, from Manioc, I don't care. I have to look at them as individuals. What do they have to contribute to South Sudanese? Rather than me seeing that person as a Nuer, I don't even want to go further to see the personality, the ideas, what they can contribute. I just look at, from Manioc, no, I can't talk to them.
Okay, and when you're saying these people are from this city or this city, are they people from different tribes?
Different tribes. And tribe is the major problem.
How many tribes are there?
It's approximated. We don't have the exact number. They approximated at 160 tribes in South Sudan.
Okay.
But the major tribes that control power, and you hear in the news, is Nuer and Dinka. It's as if these are the only tribes in South Sudan. So when people hear about them, they're seen as having control power and having misused power. But there are so many other tribes. So the main problem, the leadership is controlled now by the Dinka. If you look at the army, the majority of the people are Nuer. So they are seen as the only two people ruling the country. And that becomes problematic sometimes, or even most of the time.
Okay. And what is the title of this book?
South Sudan Ideologically.
South Sudan Ideologically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I looked at historical events, but then I also suggest, because what I always want people to know is when you talk to people, when you want to tell people, always, if you criticize them, suggest something. Tell them this is what I think, and this is why I think it's better. And then they will have to respond, we reject it this way, and this is why. And that's what we need to develop in South Sudan. Now, if I go to South Sudan and criticize people, it's not good. I can get in trouble. Mm-hmm. And we had a young man who was, not a young man, he was in his, I think, late 40s or 50s. He was also an opinion writer like me. So he was killed in December of 2005 at his home. Was shot point blank. And we had some articles written, even my name was mentioned in an article that we are some of the people the security forces don't like. People will tell me, don't go to South Sudan. You're in danger. And that's one of the issues that we have, and I want people to change from that mentality. If I say something against you, you have to sit with me and say, what you just said is wrong, but this is why it's wrong. To convince me with facts, and that's what the leadership wants to do. So in one of the chapters, which I call The Way Forward, I suggested what I call accountability models. Financial accountability models, tribal accountability models, because now we have in Jonglei State one of the worst states. There's always fighting, especially between one section of Nuer called Lao and then the Murle. They're killing themselves all the time. And the army cannot do anything because we have about 10,000 people going to the Murle land. The army cannot do anything. It's too much for them. So I suggested ways in which the leadership can actually help, because it's not all the time about money. It's about ideas. How can we use the tribal leaders to make sure that the tribe can coexist? We suggest something that's long-term, which we don't have. We don't have any accountability model they've put in place. We don't have any even financial accountability. The minister gets the funding and decides what to do. He's not accountable to anyone. We need a way in which everyone else, if the ministry, we have a directorate in the ministry. If the money comes to the minister, allocated to directorates, and then we have departments under directorate, we have to have a chain of accountability where you get the funding, the person who gives you funding will come tomorrow and ask, what have you done? That is not the case. So I suggested this accountability as a way forward. The other thing is political accountability, which is a big issue. The president is everything. He can decide something, no one questions him. When he suggests something, for example, I have a 10-year plan, and then, or not even 10-year, during independence, he said he had a 90-day plan. He had to achieve some things in 90 days after independence. Then we said, fine, let's wait. After 90 days, he did not come through. The people to say, my people, this is what I promised, this is what I achieved. He's not accountable to anyone. A good leader would come, I achieved this, I failed in this, but this is why I failed. He doesn't do that. So I suggested accountability, where he can come to the people or the parliament and let them know, this is what we are doing, this is where we are failing, and this is why. So that's what I did as part of the book.
Okay, and then in your book, do you actually give a model of what a leader should do? Like, is there a political leader now, like a president or prime minister or somewhere in the world that you base your ideas on, of a good leader?
I do that. I do some research and see what other people. I don't actually take a leader.
Okay.
For example, you need to be like this, but I can take ideas from that leader. That leader has done this and this, and also look at research, because there are some people who have made it as their career to study leadership. For example, I have a quote from one of the American scholars who said, look at Mandela and look at someone like Steve Jobs. They had a goal, but they also asked themselves, how do I achieve it? And who can help me achieve it? That's what a good leader do. What do I have to do? How do I do it? And who can help me? And that's what a good leader does. For example, Steve Jobs wanted a portable computer. That's what we wanted to do. Mandela wanted a South Africa where everyone lives together. But how was he to achieve it? He went to prison as a militant. I don't know if you read, before he went to prison, he was a militant. But when he went in prison, he changed drastically because he wanted to see how could he change South Africa inside prison. And he did that because he knew the way and he had to get allies. And that's what I do. So I don't take an example of a leader. I take what the leader does.
Mm-hmm.
That's what.
And you said he had to get allies. So allies from just the entire population, not...
Whoever can help.
Okay.
For example, in South Sudan, the allies could be people from different political parties.
Okay.
Because SPLM, Sudan People Liberation Movement, which is the ruling party, the parliament is almost 90% SPLM. So how do they get allies in terms of the political leaders from the civil society, just civil society, from the students, from the international community, NGOs, whoever can help in terms of development.
And what inspired you to write this book?
It's one, as I said, it's a perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That is one. The second thing is also the events happening now. The events happening, because I write articles all the time, but the articles, you read them and then they're gone. I want something that can actually be there. They can reference it all the time. And that was a major motivation.
And how long did it take you to write this book?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. I think editing and some, to have to confirm some research, that's what took me about a month or two. But actual writing is just 2 weeks.
What do you hope these books will do for the people of South Sudan?
It's to change the way they look at themselves. And that's what I emphasize all the time. How we look at one another should be different. There's one major event, 1991, where SPLM split and people actually died. South Sudanese fought among themselves. They were supposed to fight the government of Sudan, but they fought among themselves. In 1991, that created a legacy that still exists even now. The former vice president split from the leader of the mainstream SPLA, and people fought. Now, people look at themselves on tribal basis, especially that created a divide between Dinka and Nuer. They used to fight traditionally, but it was on a smaller scale. So what I hope to see is things happen. But for us to move forward, there has to be an angle in which we look at them. So the major thing is tribal issues, so that we look at ourselves differently. I know I have friends now who are from different tribes. I don't look at them as Nuer or Dinka. I look at them based on, I can dismiss them because I don't like the ideas. I don't dismiss them because they're from X tribe. And that's what I hope to achieve with the books. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Kuir, thank you so much for being here and for taking the time today to speak to us.
Well, thank you too, Melissa. It was my pleasure to be here.